Can't decide and torn between a romantic, comedy, action, or an indie film to watch for the weekend? Well. Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast is your ultimate guide to the latest movies. Join us as we dissect the latest on the blockbusters. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the GSMC Movie Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host Heidi, and today we are talking about two films that will make you feel all the feels. They will make you laugh, cry, probably be angry, and maybe even shout, and it just all of the emotions that you can imagine related to big issues like race, issues like prejudice, and really how that has both played in our history and how it, I guess, really makes you think about how it plays in our society now. I am talking about two big contender films, the current in-theaters film, The Green Book, and the classic Driving Miss Daisy. Yes, I know that Driving Miss Daisy is a classic. I will be very gently wading into those waters to talk about them. And The Green Book is out in theaters now. It is a huge contender for award season. It already won big at the Golden Globes. Obviously, Driving Miss Daisy has already won many awards back in its day. It has the wonderful Morgan Freeman in it. And similarly to that film, The Green Book also deals with issues of race, and it has some wonderful performances in it. I am very excited to speak about both of them, and I hope that you all enjoy hearing about them. The first one we'll be talking about is The Green Book. As I mentioned, this is out in theaters now. I highly suggest that you go see it if you have not already. It's been out for a while, but it should definitely be one that you go check out. It is directed by Peter Farrelly, produced by Jim Burke, Brian Hayes Curry, also by Peter, also produced by Nick Vallelonga and Charles B. Wessler. It is written by Nick Vallelonga, who, as I will mention later, is the son of a very important person in this story, by Tony Vallelonga, who is his father, who I will mention later. Also written by Brian Hayes Curry and Peter Farrelly as well. The film is an American comedy drama set in the Deep South in the 1960s, and it follows a music tour with African-American classical and jazz pianist Don Shirley and his driver, Tony Vallelonga, who is an Italian-American bouncer, and he is both Don Shirley's driver and also kind of his bodyguard. The guy who makes sure that the road trip goes well, that whatever Don needs, he gets, and that things kind of run smoothly. He's sort of like the muscle in case they need him. Also, as I mentioned, this film was partially produced and written by Nick Vallelonga, who is Tony's son, so the real life son of Tony. And that may lead you to think, oh, what do you mean real life? Well, this wonderful film is based off of a real story between the real Don Shirley and the real Tony Vallelonga. Also, I need to mention Don Shirley is a doctor, which Tony always refers to Don as Doc, but obviously he's not a medical doctor. He is a doctor of music. And these are two great characters. It makes the story even better than it's based off of real life. Don Shirley is played by Mahershala Ali. Tony Lip Vallelonga is played by Viggo Mortensen. And Linda Cardellini plays Dolores Vallelonga, who is Tony's wife. All of these actors are so wonderful. I just want to get that out now. I want to praise them later, but they are really great. And some quick award season facts. So this film has won the Golden Globe for Best Screenplay, Best Motion Picture in the category of Music or Comedy, and Best Performance by an Actor in a Supporting Role for Mahershala Ali. This also has been nominated for Best Motion Picture, Best Performance by an Actor in a Leading Role for Viggo Mortensen, Best Performance by an Actor in a Supporting Role for Mahershala Ali, Best Original Screenplay, and Best Achievement in Film Editing. All of those are lined up for the Oscars. And I want to mention about the title Green Book, in case you're wondering. The real Green Book was a guide for African American motorists. It showed like hotels, restaurants, and other important roadside stops and needs that would welcome African Americans on road trips and whatnot, especially in the South, where at the time that it was used, there was still lots of prejudice and a lot of places that did not welcome African Americans, like restaurants and hotels and bars and other establishments like that. It is a book that is given to Tony at the beginning of his trip with Dr. Shirley as like the guide of where Don Shirley can stay and where they can go with him. Also, I want to mention there will be a documentary called The Green Book Guide to Freedom, which is about this historic book, The Green Book. It will be premiering on February 25th on the Smithsonian Channel. So if you are interested in finding out more about the history behind this particular travel book, I think this sounds really good. Obviously, I love documentaries, so I kind of really want to watch this. So I would highly suggest looking into the history of it, which is interesting enough. But also, it is very intriguing and really interesting how this film both portrays this story and kind of how it was received by the public. So I want to start off by saying that this is a buddy comedy, kind of, but it is also like a road trip movie and more seriously a film about race and friendship and also hope, I would say, in my opinion. It's about hope. And this is a very like feel-good film. It kind of avoided going into the deeper topics. It had like an almost Disney vibe, more like Remember the Titans. It was like funny and good-natured, and it's sort of like something you've probably seen before. It almost feels old-fashioned. Like when you watch this type of movie making, it's very almost traditional and kind of, as I said, old-fashioned. It feels like you're almost watching, you're like, oh, I've seen this movie before. Like, oh, I've seen this scene before or something. It sort of like puts a spell on you in that way. And it definitely makes you feel good about the movie, which is interesting considering the topics that it covers. Also, again, as I said, Viggo Mortensen and Mahershala Ali are great in this film. They have really good chemistry, which is important because the film is basically just the two of them. There are other actors, like I mentioned, Linda Cardellini, who comes in, but she's not in a lot of the film. So it's really mostly just the two of them, like in a car as they travel or when they're at Dr. Shirley's music shows or their different stops throughout the way. But yes, they have very good chemistry. Mahershala and Viggo are really funny together. In my opinion, they really make the film. I'm so impressed by just their portrayals. And especially, like, you can really see, I just want to mention, you can really see Mahershala Ali's acting chops just come out as he portrays Dr. Shirley. He like, reveals some of, like, the shadings and complexity just as this road trip and as this story progresses. And he hints well at like the inner torment that's really driving Dr. Shirley, and just sort of like what made him build this like refined outer shell. Also, Viggo Mortensen is great. He is good in so many things, but particularly in this film, he embodies this character Tony so well, and in a way that could become this really obnoxious caricature of an Italian American. But he just skates right on that fine line between almost like insulting, not interesting caricature, to really portray someone who you believe has true heart, and who really does, who just seems really honest and very sincere. It's a very sincere performance, and I really enjoyed watching that. Also, he did gain a lot of weight for this film, and he looks perfect for this role. I'm very impressed. And okay, so another thing I want to mention, as I said before, this film feels almost traditional and really almost formulaic in how they make it. Like they're not breaking filmmaking barriers really at all. And like it did make me wonder, like with the film feeling so familiar, like do we as a modern audience want more of these films that make us kind of feel good about where we are right now, particularly where we are with race relations. Because as I said, this film does take place in the 1960s. So it just kind of felt like it was almost like showing us like how far we've come. And that does come up in other criticisms I've read about this movie, and particularly with the director, Peter Farrelly. When he won a Golden Globe, his speech was very controversial for many, and sort of hinted almost like we just need to love each other and then we'll be fine, and almost like racism is a thing of the past. And people have critiqued this film for that and for the views of the director. So that is interesting. I feel like that did influence how I saw this film a bit, since I watched it after the Golden Globes and after hearing a little bit about Peter's speech. So before I continue, we're going to take a quick break. So please hang tight and we'll be right back.
Want to know the latest and hottest music hitting the airwaves? Don't be left out. Listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Music Podcast. Keith keeps you on the loop with everything you need to know from pop, rock, hip-hop, and the top 40. And we'll throw in news of your favorite artists, concert and tour dates, and so much more. Listen no further, because this is the gold standard in music podcast.
Hello and welcome back to the GSMC Movie Podcast. We are continuing to talk about the films The Green Book and Driving Miss Daisy. I want to continue speaking on the film The Green Book. As I mentioned earlier in the podcast, this movie is in theaters. It is not, as I record this, it has not just come out. It has been out for a while. If you have not seen it yet, I highly suggest that you do. I want to also mention a few more of the critiques of this film. As I said before, it is a feel-good film, and I really did enjoy watching it. I really want to say that before anyone feels like I'm tearing it down too much. I did really enjoy it. The performances are spectacular, and I really do think you should watch it. But to continue, I would say this film could have dwelled more on Dr. Shirley's complex feelings about his relationship to his race, and also to the white people that he performs for. Dr. Shirley being an African-American man in America, being, a highly educated man, he's very cultured. He lives in a spectacular apartment above Carnegie Hall. In fact, when he interviews Tony to be his driver, Dr. Shirley's sitting in a throne, basically looking down on Tony, and it is really interesting to see him presented in that way. But then through both Ali's performance and just throughout the way the film progresses and just the trip that the two go on into the South from New York, you really see how Dr. Shirley struggles with his race, and also particularly compared to the way that the rich, educated white people react to him, the ones that he performs for. They accept him so much when he's on stage, applaud him, and, are greatly impressed by his talent and his education and sort of his pedigree in a way. But then once he's off the stage, he still has to go by all of the rules of white society, what bathroom he can and cannot use, and just how he is viewed by so many of the people that he is performing for, so many of his patrons. It could also have gone more into Tony's anger problem. Tony is, as I said, he is an Italian American. He basically grew up in one neighborhood in the Bronx and is very happy to live there for the rest of his life and raise his own children there. Again, he could have become a bit more of a obnoxious, insensitive caricature of an Italian American, and I don't feel like they relied on that too heavily. it does come up, but I feel like they did that well, especially through Viggo Mortensen's portrayal of Tony. But they don't really dwell too much on Tony's own, like his anger and his short temper. He's very quick just to like try and punch his way out of situations and coerce people and not lie, but he uses a different word for it that I'm not going to say here. But they could have dwelled on that a little bit more. They didn't really. I mean, instead of looking into Dr. Shirley's relationship with his race, it's really like brought up once and then it's not further discussed. Or at least it's overtly brought up between Dr. Shirley and Tony. They bring it up and then it really doesn't come up again. You see it show a little bit through Dr. Shirley, through his sort of veneer of refinement. You see it crack a little bit, but they don't really discuss it. Because of Mahershala Ali's great performance, I do feel it's potentially that this film wanted to present this topic and some of these more complicated topics, sort of like when you're looking at art. And when you see a really good piece of art, it speaks to you and you can see it and sometimes see your own feelings and your own interpretations in the piece, sort of like projecting on it and it informing you and informing your thoughts and feelings about it. And that's because art isn't always trying to tell you directly what it means. And I'm like, well, maybe this film could be doing something similar, like it's presenting you with these topics and these ideas and wanting you to sort of draw out of it how you feel and how you see it, which all art does, and I would say all good movies do to some extent. But this film does not. It could really have a deeper discussion that could be more revealing and more thought-provoking, but they really don't. As I said again, they bring it up once because Dr. Shirley says it, and it's not really much of a discussion between him and Tony. So I feel like they could have, but they didn't. Instead, they left us with a feel-good film that is just enjoyable to watch. It's not a deep-thinking film. Also, I want to say this movie almost proudly displays scenes of like blatant racism, sort of like to remind us of how far we have come in society. And like it just shows like, oh, like friendship can overcome racism. And it is very like that's a very nice thought. And it did apparently happen for real, for the real like Tony and Don Shirley, but this is just like one tale of that happening. And it shouldn't really be something that convinces us that it will just, happen for all of us and that friendship can just easily overcome racism. I find that a little difficult to take as like, well, you just got to be friends with someone and you'll be fine. It can be a bit complicated. I have also heard criticism that the film gives this like white savior message, kind of like that Tony saves Don. And I feel that it's not as strong of a message as it could be. I sort of feel like basically the film could be worse about that. It does portray Tony a bit saving, like he does save Dr. Shirley in situations, like he'll physically take him out of bad situations, like with police or with other people who were just very overtly racist to him. And he does help Dr. Shirley a lot and give him honest friendship. But in many ways, I also feel that Dr. Shirley saves Tony. He teaches him some things about like his speech and how to present himself, and also tries to really encourage him to be more honest in his behavior and just to behave better and be more honest and can't use that word again. Not a liar, but not just talking himself out of all situations and punching his way out. I feel like he wants more out of Tony. So I don't feel like it's just a one-sided savior type relationship. I feel like they help each other out, as good friends do. Also, just like the hypocrisies of the segregation are so clear, like with Dr. Shirley being like an African-American artist but yet denied service at so many hotels, and like it just like so brutally shows white supremacy that again, I just really feel like this film wants me to be like, well, at least it's not like that anymore. And I don't know. It doesn't really give us a lot to chew on. It mostly just makes us feel happy. And it really aims to lift our spirits as opposed to just make us feel down. And it does make me feel that way. I watched this film and I did, laugh a lot and really felt heartwarmed. It was really heartwarming. And I enjoyed it because of that. So I don't know. It's a feel-good film. The leads are really great in this film. I really feel like they're what make it, and they really, when they're together, Mahershala Ali and Viggo Mortensen really shine, and their chemistry really comes through. So I highly suggest it for the acting. If you want a feel-good film, I would say go for it. It's a good film to go see with your family, and it is uplifting. It is encouraging. If you're going to walk away thinking you have a lot to deeply think about, or that this film will just like tell you truths that you didn't know or present to you new filmmaking tactics, that's not what this type of film is. It's more traditional, and I think that can be very comforting in many ways. It can be a very like comfort food type of film if you're not looking for something that's too deep. So those are my feelings about The Green Book. I want to move on to a classic film that is related. This is like the opposite of The Green Book. Instead of a white driver driving an educated, cultured black passenger, as happens in The Green Book, this is about a African-American chauffeur played by Morgan Freeman, and he's driving like the rich white passenger who's Miss Daisy. This film was made in 1989, directed by Bruce Beresford, written by Alfred Uri, and he did the screenplay, which was adapted from his play by the same name. It stars Morgan Freeman as Hoke Colburn, Jessica Tandy as Daisy Worthen, and Dan Aykroyd as Bully Worthen. It is about an older Jewish woman and her African-American chauffeur in the American South, and it shows their relationship as it grows and improves over the years. Also, this film, it has won an Oscar for Best Picture, along with an Oscar for lead actress Jessica Tandy as Ms. Davis. Also an Oscar for makeup and writing. It won a Golden Globe for lead actress as well for Jessica Tandy in a musical or comedy, and lead actor in musical or comedy for Morgan Freeman. So very highly awarded and enjoyed by many, many people. Before I go too much into this, we're going to take a quick break. So we'll be right back and continue talking about Driving Miss Daisy.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Movie Podcast. We are continuing to talk about the classic film Driving Miss Daisy, and I had always grown up hearing about this movie. I knew that it was a classic and one that Morgan Freeman is particularly very well known for. He portrayed Hoke in both the movie version and also the on-stage play version, so I know that he's really in this in a lot of different ways. So I was excited to see it, and I have a few points I want to share. First of all, throughout this film, I really felt the awkward balance between like server or employee and friend, and the uncomfortable place that Hoke is in, and really the idea almost of like erasing this white guilt by thinking that your server, your employee, really sincerely is your friend, and that makes their social position okay. Again, this was made in 1989, and I'm not saying this is a flaw of the film based on the time that it was made, the year, but the film portrays this type of awkward balance. So I will say they do that well, because I really felt it. This particular idea, it comes to mind when I think about like the final scene of the movie, which I won't go into too much detail about, but also another scene when Ms. Daisy, she goes to listen to a speech by Martin Luther King at a dinner. And when she's going to listen, she has Hoke drive her. And she was going to take her son and daughter-in-law, but they ended up not being able to go, or, well, choosing not to go for appearance reasons. So she has extra tickets. And so they're not going to go, and Hoke, being her driver, is driving her. And although she has the extra tickets, it does not occur to her to invite him to come inside and listen. And at the entrance of the speech venue, she says to Hoke, things have changed. And Hoke replies that they haven't really changed much at all. And he kind of says that as he like opened the car door and offers to help her inside the venue, as he acts as her chauffeur, as her employee, as her server in a very subservient position, a place that is not an equal to her. And I feel like you feel this awkward, like to her, many things are changed and she is not prejudiced, which she says many times. But yet she might believe that, but that's not reflected in the reality of her situation with Hoke. And she's not trying super, super hard, at least overtly, to be like best friends with him. She does treat him as an employee, but you can tell the relationship grows closer over time. I just felt bad for Hoke in this situation because he's so friendly and so loyal. It felt a little bit awkward to me, and really told me a lot about a situation that many people are in still to this day, and that a lot of people were in back when this film takes place. It takes place over a long period of time, from the 50s to the 60s to the 70s. So it does sort of show me maybe how some of those relationships could be very convoluted and confusing at a time in our country back then. Also, I never feel like Ms. Daisy comes to see her own prejudice. And that really it brought out some of my cynicism and made me feel like she doesn't deserve a friend or even an employee as loyal as Hoke is. And it made me a little bit embittered towards her. I did feel some sympathy towards her around the end, but throughout the film, I sort of felt like, I don't know, I guess that's how she shows love to people, but it's a little frustrating for me because I really put myself in Hope's shoes, I guess, in that situation. However, I guess I should provide a counterpoint to my cynicism, which is that you do see signs of real friendships evolving throughout the film. For example, there's one thing that is pretty consistent. Hoke respectfully talks to Ms. Daisy and expresses his disagreement with some things that she does or implies. And this really shows that he feels comfortable enough with her to converse in a way that's beyond just employee and employer. Also, Ms. Daisy does offer to teach him how to read and write because he cannot read or write, and she is a former school teacher. So you do see those type of things come through, which were like glimmers of hope throughout this story. And it's also, I don't know, it's like an easygoing story for something that could be so violent about race in the South, and there are many films like that. This film is not necessarily that. There is an act of violence, but you don't actually see it. It just occurs off camera. You hear about it. So that is interesting. And again, I don't know. I had mixed feelings about Miss Daisy. Also, Jessica Tandy, so she won an Oscar for her role as Miss Daisy and a Golden Globe. And really, like anyone that's good at anything, the actors really make their performances look so easy, which is always impressive to see. And the award-winning makeup helps as well. It helps the audience understand that the characters are growing older and that time has passed since the last scene, and they did that very well. Again, they won awards for it, so clearly well done. And that helped throughout the story because there's not too many obvious markers of the date, but it does come up like when they mention the type of car that Hoke is upgrading to, or she'll mention her age. Like one time she sort of, Ms. Daisy off the cuff says that she's like, oh, like that's not something to say to a 90-year-old, like she brings it up. So that is also well done. And as I mentioned, the film moves along smoothly. There aren't any big violent outbursts. It sort of moves slow. And it went like so slow for me that when the ending came, I wasn't expecting this like big, quick swell of emotion that I felt. I thought that the film would just like slowly dissolve into nothingness. So it took me by surprise with the really heartfelt ending. Because I didn't feel stirred too much throughout the rest of the film, and seeing at the very end, it suddenly hit me pretty powerfully. So I was impressed by that. And it's possible the film just didn't grab me from the beginning like it was intended to, or that it did for other people. But at the very end, it did bring about a few sniffles, even in my cold, dead heart. So I did feel some things from that. So I appreciated that ending. I think if it had just dissolved into nothingness, kind of like how I anticipated it would, I would not have appreciated it as much as I do. And despite my cynicisms against the character Ms. Daisy, I did feel some sympathy for her in the end, and I did feel a little bit more understanding. Also, the performances are very good, and I was very impressed. Some of the cantankerous remarks of Ms. Daisy made me chuckle a bit, so I greatly enjoyed that. And I would really suggest it. It is a classic. Please go see it if you have not. Also, please go see The Green Book. It is definitely a feel-good film, which I would highly suggest. And with all of that said, that brings us to the end of the show. Thank you so much for listening, and please tune in to the next GSMC Movie Podcast episode.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.